So here's a question for you. Why is it that at the top of all kinds of book lists, the top 20 business books or self help books or psychology books, religious books, and certainly autobiographies, invariably you'll find Holocaust books? It's almost absurd sometimes when I see one of these Holocaust books at the top of one of these lists that doesn't even seem like it should be there. And the reason is because the Holocaust has a unique place in recent history and in today's life. It has so much to teach us about evil, about the atrocities of the world, but also about the possibilities in the world, about goodness, and what my teacher and Holocaust survivor, Dr. Viktor Frankl, calls the defiant power of the human spirit. We want and we need to learn about this defiant power of the human spirit, and where better to learn it than the Holocaust? That's what we're going to talk about today. I am Baruch Halevi, also known as B. I am your guide through the afternoon of life, co-founder of Soul Centered, a spiritual center for meaning, purpose, and healing devoted to the afternoon of life. It's that second half of life. I'm not going to define it for you, but you know it when you're in it. And when you're in it, you want more than anything else to figure out, what is this defiant power of the human spirit? How do I access it? And how do I unleash it to live my life with more meaning and purpose and, yes, healing? And all of these can be and should be, must be found in the lessons of the Holocaust. Today is Yom HaShoah, which is the Jewish Holocaust Memorial Day. The International Day, I think, is back in January. It has a lot less significance, I think, certainly to Jews, but even to the world. It's one of these things where it just kind of gets lost in the shuffle, oftentimes because it's so big, it's so macro. We just got to kind of have things specific sometimes and focused. And Yom HaShoah is the Holocaust Day from a Jewish perspective, but it doesn't have to be just for Jews. It shouldn't be. Just like these books, Elie Wiesel's Night and Corrie ten Boom's book and Anne Frank's book, the Diary of a Young Girl, and certainly my teacher and mentor, Dr. Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, and so many other worthy and inspirational books are out there. And they're at the top of these lists because I believe we are hungry to learn the atrocities, the dark side of the human capabilities as demonstrated by the Nazis. We want to, we need to study that, to understand it. We cannot lose those lessons, or else we're doomed to repeat the mistakes, the atrocities of history. And so in Judaism, we say never again. It's a mantra that we've been saying for since the Holocaust. Never again will we allow this to happen to Jews. Will we allow this to happen to any group? Doesn't matter who you are, or where you are, or what you stand for, what you believe in. All of us must say never again to allowing evil to reign. And we must study the Holocaust. I do believe that's partially why these books are on those lists. And by the way, I was inspired to give this talk because last week a new list came out, the 20 most important autobiographies of all time. And the top slots were, I think, Knight and Corrie ten Boom's book, I can never remember the name of it, is up there. But number one was Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank, and number two was Man's Search for Meaning. The most important books, alongside some amazing books, Mandela and Gandhi and other great figures throughout history. But number one and number two, these Holocaust books, because we as a species, as human beings, want to understand the darkness, the desperation, and we need to remember it. This is not a Jewish day. This is a day of remembering the destruction, the devastation, and the desperation. But it is also about inspiration. Because when you read Anne Frank's book, when you read Man's Search for Meaning, when you read these books, you walk away with, well, what Dr. Frankl calls the defiant power of the human spirit. It's just beyond belief that so many of these men and women, some famous, infamous at this point, and some most anonymous, some were outward heroic acts of bravery and the stuff of movies, and others were small but not so small, ordinary but truly extraordinary acts of self-sacrifice and courage and love and honor. We need to tell that story too. Yes, keep teaching never again and the atrocities of this atrocious event in history. But let's also, it's a yes and, it's not either or, it's a yes and. Let's talk about the defiant power of the human spirit as embodied by Anne Frank and Dr. Frankel and Elie Wiesel and so many others, and so many that weren't Jewish. I am so passionate about righteous Gentiles. It's the name, the title of honor, almost sainthood that we give upon those who weren't Jewish and risked life and limb, and many gave their lives to protect Jews, to protect the innocent. Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Memorial in Israel, has a whole section devoted to the righteous Gentiles and so many benefits for their descendants, because we understand that these are men and women who could have gone along with the crowd, who could have kept their mouths shut, and yet they didn't. They put themselves in harm's way. There's a picture. I just wrote a blog on this. Look at the blog. Look at the picture. Maybe you've seen it. There's a whole slew, an army of neo-Nazis, or not neo-Nazis, they're Nazis, and they have their, I'm not going to do it, they have their arm in the salute to Hitler, except one man in the sea of faces. It's a true story. His name is August Landmesser, and this was a man, you can just see him in the sea of faces. This act of defiance. I mean, it's so easy for us to say, well, just, don't salute Hitler among thousands of others. You lose your life. You did lose your life. He lost his life eventually to the Nazis. He wasn't a Jew. He happened to be married to a Jew. He happened to have principles and believed that what was happening was wrong. And so he stood his ground. This picture is just it's exemplary. It's just amazing of the defiant power of the human spirit. If every German would have responded like August, we never would have had the Holocaust. Hitler rose to power not simply because of the Nazi Party, but those who voted them in, and then those who stood idly by, unlike the Sisters of Zion, who were obviously nuns, and they rescued young Jews, took them in during the war, saved them, or one of my now unbelievable teachers and mentors and inspirations in life, Pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Dr. and Pastor Bonhoeffer, a minister, gave his life ultimately in fighting the Nazis. Listen to his audiobook or read his autobiography. This is a man who didn't have to go into harm's way, and yet he did, because he was a man of God and he embodied the true message of Christianity. And he attempted to, he was part of the plot to murder Adolf Hitler, and ultimately gave his life, but not before inspiring countless of others to stand up, to do the right thing. One of my other favorite stories is, I can never pronounce his name, Witold Pilecki. There's a great book about him, something like The Man Who Chose to Go to Auschwitz. He was a non-Jewish man, Polish resistance fighter, and he opted to go into Auschwitz as a prisoner to ultimately break Jews out. These are righteous Gentiles. These are people who exemplified Dr. Frankel's defiant power of the human spirit. And these are just, again, the explicit examples, but there are so many others. Dr. Frankel says in Man's Search for Meaning the following, that there were men and women who just inspired us. And he says, the man is that being who invented gas chambers of Auschwitz. However, he is also that being who entered those chambers upright with the Lord's Prayer, or the Jewish prayer, the Shema Yisrael, on their lips as they died. There's so many examples of ordinary men and women doing extraordinary things, putting themselves between the bullet of the Nazis and their children, or a complete stranger, but ultimately trying to defend them and giving their lives, going into the gas chambers with the Lord's Prayer, with the Shema Yisrael on their lips, not giving up hope, not giving up faith. Ultimately, untold, countless examples of the defiant power of the human spirit. We need to seek out these examples, to study them, to learn from them, to embody them in our day and age. They have so much to impart to us, to teach us how to confront our suffering, which certainly pales in comparison to theirs, how to navigate our adversity if they could navigate theirs, how to transform the desperation, as Dr. Viktor Frankl did, into inspiration. This was a man whose wife was murdered, whose parents were murdered, his sibling was murdered, his community was murdered, he was stripped of everything, his unborn child was murdered, and yet he came out the other side and he illuminated a darkened world, still carrying that darkness within him, still carrying all of that atrocity in his heart, but not allowing it to penetrate his soul, turning his life into an example of illumination and inspiration. We owe it to him. We owe it to Anne Frank and to Elie Wiesel. We owe it to those who perished in the Holocaust. We owe it to the righteous Gentiles. We owe it to the countless nameless victims who ultimately went to the grave through becoming martyrs, giving their lives, living lives of inspiration, even at times of ultimate and utter desperation. Yes, we must say never again. So let's keep saying it. Join in to this mantra, and we must say it, we must shout it, we must live it, but let's add to it something else. Let's add to it what I say is always and forever. Always and forever will we also remember the self-sacrifice and the courage and the honor just demonstrated by so many Germans, by so many good people. Dr. Frankl is the one who said there are only two races, the decent and the indecent. Let's hold people accountable to that standard. Let's get rid of all of the divisions of race and ethnicity and religion and get back to two races, the decent and the indecent. Let's say always and forever to that. Let's say always and forever to embodying such extraordinary demonstrations of courage by such seemingly ordinary human beings. And let's say always and forever to the defiant power of the human spirit and the ability to rise beyond ourselves, to transcend ourselves, and to live out the defiant power of human spirit no matter what we are facing. We honor those who perished in the Holocaust, those who survived. We continue on their legacy by saying never again and by saying yes, always and forever. You can read this blog on my website, mysoulcenter.org. You can reach out to me. There's going to be a lot more coming around the defiant power of the human spirit, as I'm passionate about Dr. Frankl, logotherapy, his psychotherapy, and taking this message, this philosophy, this way of life to the world. It is not about being Jewish or Gentile or any of the divisions. It's about being a decent person who wants to live a life of meaning, purpose, and goodness. And that will come when we all summons and live the defiant power of the human spirit. Until the next time, shalom, salam, namaste, and peace.